Bye. Hey guys, what's up? My name is Dom. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, I typically make bookish content, movie content, and anything else in between because I like to do whatever I want on this channel, and tonight's going to be bookish content. For this video, I'm going to be talking about the 9 books I read in April. 7 of them have been completed, but the other 2 I started and just did not finish them in April. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first book I finished in April is Tokyo Ghoul Void by Shin Towada. This is a light novel based on the manga. The manga is written by Sui Ishida. If you don't know what Tokyo Ghoul is about, it takes place in a world where ghouls run amok. They are scary because yes, they could disguise themselves as humans, however their diet is humans, and then one day our main character Kaneki gets into an accident and now he is half human and half ghoul. There are about 4 light novels based on the Tokyo Ghoul universe. I read one of them, I think Days. I read the first one in March. So Days is made up of short stories that are very early in the series. Void is made up of short stories that take place after Kaneki left Untaiku. And I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars, which is a better rating than I gave Days. I like this one better just because all the short stories, they are connected in the same way Days is, but they're actually connected a lot better. So in Days they were connected, but you could read the short stories in any order you want and it wouldn't matter. Whereas this one you actually do have to read them in order. So this one feels like there's one cohesive story within a bunch of short stories, if that makes more sense. I still have the same problem I had with Days, whereas this is very much more tell than show, and the author doesn't really let you make your own inferences. You're not allowed to ask your own questions. He does tell you everything rather than letting you read between the lines. However, because they're all connected into one big story, that's why I still liked it. My favorites were the ones that focused on Amon and Hinami, but yeah, that's basically all I have to say about this. It's really hard to talk about these things when you have not read the original manga, because I don't want to spoil anything. The next book I read is Demon Slayer Volume 6. This is by Koyoharu Gotoge. This manga series takes place in the universe where there are demons. They do feast on humans. Our main character Tanjiro, there's an accident at his home and his sister is turned into a demon. So then he joins the Demon Slayer Corps, which is a group of people that kill demons, trying to figure out a way to turn his sister Nezuko back into a human. I gave this volume 4 out of 5 stars. The beginning is very intense. There's a very intense trial, and it helped me understand the Hashira characters even more, because I remember watching the anime. How do I talk about this without spoiling? But I remember watching the anime getting really mad at them for whatever reason. I had no right to be mad at them when I remember they're demon slayers, but reading it actually helped me see that, so I learned to love them more and not be so angry. This whole volume is clearly just a transitionary period into the next arc, but I still really enjoyed it. The one gripe I do have is the end. Again, how do I say this without spoiling, because this is kind of deep into the series now. There's a massive kill-off of demons near the end. Was it truly to show how villainous the villain is, or is it a cop-out for the author when it comes to writing in different arcs? That's the main question I had, but I don't want to get too deep into that discussion because I don't want to spoil anything. But at the end of the day, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read is Tokyo Ghoul Past by Shin Towada. This is the 3rd light novel, and this is also the last one I read. I do not own the 4th. All of these stories take place before Kaneki was turned into a ghoul, and this is honestly my least favorite of the 3 light novels. Again, same problem with the tell versus show, but I think I hated it more in this novel just because I didn't enjoy the stories as much. The stories weren't as connected to each other as the other 2 novels were, and that's what I liked about them so much. So that was really disappointing to see, and I wasn't really a fan of a lot of the stories in this. I thought a lot of them were very boring. The one I really did like was about Nishiki and his girlfriend Kimi. That was about how they met, and that was just really nice to see, because if you've even seen Tokyo Ghoul or if you've read the manga, Nishiki is a very arrogant person. I want to say he's an asshole essentially, but he's like a good guy asshole, if that makes sense. But in this he was really soft, and I love seeing that side of him. In the manga and in the anime, they do make a point to show that Kimi is very important to him. Despite being the shortest one out of the 3, I think this one took me the longest to read just because I didn't want to pick it up. So that's very sad because I do love Tokyo Ghoul, but alas, you can't love everything. And I ended up giving this 2.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Demon Slayer Volume 7. If you've seen the anime or even seen trailers for anything, this is when the Mugen Train arc begins. I gave this volume between like 4.5, 4.75 out of 5 stars. Kind of a 5-star read too. What an action-packed volume. It started out hilarious, and then all of a sudden I was crying because of how sad it was, and then it was just extremely fast paced, but just such an adventure. Earlier in the series, I definitely had a gripe with how the author was portraying her action because I thought the pacing was very choppy. I think she's definitely found her footing by now, and that's why this was so good. I laughed, cried, and gasped all in one sitting for this volume, and people were right. People said the Mugen Train arc is actually very short, and seeing how this one ends, totally right. And this character, I just find him so interesting because of how suspicious he was the whole time, but it was masked as humor in the beginning, and I thought that was an excellent way to portray that. So I had a lot of fun with this one. Out of all 7 volumes, this one is definitely a favorite. So the next I read a children's book, and that is Strega Nona by Tomie de Paula. So I was scrolling through Facebook, and I found a sequence of photos that were just, the whole thing was just to trigger your memories, just like a nostalgic thing. And it mentioned all the books you used to be able to find at school book fairs, and Strega Nona was part of that thread, and I completely forgot about this book. But once I saw that, I remember being excited to check it out from the school library, so I was like, let's see if it's on the Libby app so I can read it again, because I remember nothing about it. So I found it. I read it, and it's about a boy who meets this witch. Her pot makes a lot of pasta because it takes place in Italy, and then she goes away, so he's left to handle the pot, and he does not handle it well. I was really excited to read this. Unfortunately, I only gave it like 3 to 4 out of 5 stars. I don't know why I'm saying unfortunately. Like, that's not a bad rating by any means. I think it's just because my thing with this, there's nothing bad to say. I love the artwork. Actually, that's a good thing to say. I do love the artwork. It reminds me of like older books as a story, and this just could be because of an age thing, because I'm 25 reading a book for 2nd graders. But I thought the story was just okay. It really hinged on my nostalgia, and that's why I read it. I wanted that nostalgic factor, and I got it. So can't hate the book. 3 out of 5 stars. So one of my goals in life is to read all the books that my favorite musicals are based on. My favorite musicals of all time are Les Miserables, The Phantom of the Opera, Wicked, and West Side Story. I have read Les Miserables. West Side Story, I have read Romeo and Juliet. I have not read Wicked. However, in the month of March, I have read The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. This book takes place in an opera house in Paris, France in the late 1890s, I believe. It centers on an opera singer named Christine. The love of her life is a boy named Raoul. However, there are some mishaps at this opera house, and people believe there is an opera ghost, hence the Phantom of the Opera. I went into this book actually exceeded my expectations, first of all, but I went into this book thinking it was going to be different than what it was, because I did react to the silent film, and I'll link that up above, and the silent film, it was very creepy. But I noticed how different it was from Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical, because, like, my opinion on Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical, yes, the Phantom is a bad person, but he wrote the music in such a way that you kind of forget that, and he does seem very romantic, whereas the silent film, it's very clear he's not a good person, and he is scary. Christine, it's a bad thing for Christine to fall in love with him, and I was expecting this book to be more like the silent film. But I was very surprised to find out it is actually more like the musical. And because people were telling me Andrew Lloyd Webber kind of veered away from the book. But I thought, and I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, I don't know if he did this on purpose or just wanted to make beautiful music, but either way, I thought he actually stayed very close to this tone. So just to somewhat try to give like a cohesive review of this, I love the style this book was written in. This book is written like a dissertation, so the narrator himself is actually a character within the story. Because the narrator talks about how it's like 1910 or whatever, and he's going through museums, he's going through the opera house himself, he's interviewing people to find out everything, and all of his findings are compiled into one story, which is the story of the Phantom of the Opera itself. I love when books do that. A modern example I can think of is actually a series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket, because Lemony Snicket himself is a character in that story, and that whole series is his dissertation on what happened to the Baudelaire children, and it gives just such a good creepy vibe. The beginning to this was very creepy, and I loved it. As for the pacing of the novel and the sequence of events, I kind of have mixed emotions. Like, I loved the beginning. The middle, he was kind of losing me just because it was a little boring, but the ending, he got me again. I loved the ending, and the ending I noticed is the Phantom's fate, I should say, is actually a bit different than the musical. The book does delve deeper into the future, so that was really cool to see. But even despite my gripe with how kind of boring the middle was, I did love seeing the characterization of everyone. I thought Christine's fear was very palpable. Like, I felt that for her, and I loved seeing how dramatic Raoul was. And seeing the Phantom's manipulation was really cool, and just seeing how clever he was. What a very clever character. But just going back to his manipulation, that's where I think the musical actually got it right. Because again, like I said, that silent film, it's told like a true horror story. So you know from the beginning, he's just not a good person. Whereas in the musical, the way Andrew Lloyd Webber made the music, very beautiful, oftentimes serene. It really encaptures you, like especially the song The Music of the Night. He's clearly manipulating Christine during that song, but like it's also almost romantic in a way, whereas like you as the audience fall for it. And that's how this book is. But the way Gaston Leroux wrote him, he is charming and romantic to the point I was falling for it sometimes. Like there were often times where I was like, okay, I wouldn't mind if a guy did that to me. Like, okay, I think Christine's okay with this person. And then I have to remind myself she's, you know, locked in a room and is not allowed to leave. So all that is to say, basically, is that Gaston Leroux wrote the manipulation of the Phantom so well that even the reader falls for it. And another one of my favorite things reading this book is just to see where the musical grabbed inspiration from. Some of the lyrics of the musical are actually grabbed straight from this book and this specific translation. I thought that was really cool. And then one of the most notable things that I noticed about the musical, if you've seen the musical, you know oftentimes people say Christine's name twice. And so it's like, Christine, Christine. And they do that because there's actually a chapter in this book called Christine, Christine. And every few lines of the chapter, it's Raoul screaming out, Christine, Christine. So like it's something so simple, and yet Andrew Lloyd Webber took that and kind of made like a gag out of it. And I love that for him. Gag's probably not the right word to use given it's not funny in the musical, but like a theme. He made a theme out of it. And you know what? Good for him. I love that for him. At the end, there's still a mystery element. By the end of the book, we don't actually know what happened to many of these characters, and the author makes you ask that question yourself. And for many of the horror novels I like, it's because they use that type of technique where they don't actually answer a lot of questions at the end, just because I feel like by having those unanswered questions, it makes the story creepier and more unsettling, which I think is what you would want for a horror story. So I gave this book between 4 to 4.5 out of 5 stars. The only thing I wish I had done was actually read this closer to the fall season, just because I think it would fit that vibe more. So the last book I completed in April is a nonfiction book, and that is Lies My Teacher Told Me: Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong by James W. Lowen. So Lowen is a historian, and he has studied high school history textbooks for years. I think he even co-authored some, and he noticed the trend in a lot of history textbooks that they are told in a very boring way. It makes a lot of students disengage from U.S. history. He also noticed a lot of textbooks don't really delve into history. It's on a very broad scale, and it often paints America to be a lot better than it is, and it takes out a lot of things that our government doesn't want us to know. So he spends this whole book discussing that and discusses 10 different points and goes really into it, and I actually learned a lot from this book. I learned that Helen Keller was a socialist. Never knew that. Like, yes, I learned about Helen Keller in school, but, you know, a lot of American politics is anti-socialism, so of course they weren't going to tell us this person who was huge for social advocacy was a socialist. So in the past, our government did make a lot of treaties and deals with Native Americans and with Black Americans, especially after slavery. And, like, I knew that, and I knew we broke some, but I didn't realize how much of those treaties and deals were broken until reading this. And this book also opens up a lot of discussions to have that I thought were interesting. Basically, the conclusions of this book that Lowen comes up with is that there's what actually happened in America versus what the American government wants us to know and what's hidden in our history textbooks. And a lot of it deals with how to make the oppressors themselves comfortable. And another thing he discussed actually is that a lot of U.S. history teachers don't even know their own history or their own country's history. Some of them, yes, majored in history in college, but oftentimes what some high schools do, and even my own high school did this, is that they would hire these people to be coaches. But the coaches can't just be their only job. Like, they have to be teachers in order to be coaches, so they just assign them to random subjects. And he also discussed how some teachers just don't know how to teach history outside of the textbook, and it's this one's personal because I actually had a U.S. history teacher in high school who's exactly like the type of teacher he is critiquing, but she would teach straight from these textbooks every single day. It is still the worst and most boring class I've ever had in my high school career. I remember the assignments. She was that teacher where, like, rather than thinking of her own assignments, she would have us do whatever, like, the book suggested. Like, if the book suggested do a Venn diagram, we had to spend 50 minutes working on a Venn diagram. To make a long story short, me and this teacher actually got into an argument at the end of the year, and I did tell her, maybe if you knew how to do your job, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So she stormed out of the classroom after I said that, and I did not get in trouble. Young me had balls. I do not have the balls to say that to someone anymore, but young me, do not say shit to 15, 16-year-old Dom. But all that is to say, yes, I had a teacher that this person's talking about, and I would often think about her reading this, like, all these cool things you could have taught us. And she herself didn't know much about history. And she's actually a prime example of the coach to teacher thing. She coached a sport and kind of got thrusted into the history class. So all that is to say, I have a personal antidote. Like, I know, like, my one story isn't empirical by any means, but I have a personal antidote that completely relates to this book. So, like, this book hit a little too close to home. However, as for a rating, I did only give it 3 out of 5 stars. Because one of his arguments was that, you know, history textbooks are boring. There should be a better way to tell the story. But he writes this book in the same style as those boring history textbooks. So there were often times, because I was actually listening, I wasn't, like, physically reading it, I was listening to this on audiobook. There were often times where my attention would just go elsewhere. Because I just got bored. But I don't want to give it a bad rating because of that, because I did learn a lot of important info, which was his main goal at the end of the day. So this is more of a run-of-the-mill book to me. If you're super into US history and are super into those discussion topics I was talking about, then I would recommend this book. However, if you want something, like, super, like, invigorating and exciting and, like, new to the you're new to the history world, then I would not recommend this. It's very run-of-the-mill when it comes to that. So at the end of the day, I give this 3 out of 5 stars. There are 2 books that I read in April but did not complete. The first one being, of course, Paradise Lost by John Milton. I actually started this in either February or March, I believe. I don't actually remember which month. I only read, like, 2 chapters. I'm trying to finish it. It's just, I read a chapter a day because it's so exhausting. Like, it's so good, but it's so exhausting to read these chapters with the way they're written. I do have 4 left. Hopefully I can finish it in May. And then a book I started in April is Chronicle in Stone by Ismail Kadare. As of filming this, I actually have finished the book. I finished it in May, so I'm going to wait to the May wrap up. But I was able to get through about 2/3 of the book by the time April ended. My neighbors got really loud all of a sudden, but that is it for this April wrap up. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. It was kind of a mess filming this because I kept stumbling over my words and felt like I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about and going off topic. Let me know down below what you guys read in April, any good books, any bad books. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up, comment, subscribe, y'all know the drill, and without further ado, I'm gonna peace out and I'll see you guys later. Ciao tutti.